All right. So welcome everyone, and let's start the webinar. And the topic today is the data-driven improvement. And some of you have met me before. I'm Emil Ackerman, one of the founders in Quva, and currently the head of sales and marketing. And Quva itself is an artificial intelligence software company focusing on the manufacturing excellence of process industries, especially in the pulp, paper, and cardboard production. But today, the start of the day is Tom Anderzén, who is with us. Welcome, Tom.
Thank you.
And Tom, just shortly about Tom, he has worked in various business development positions in a number of manufacturing and finance companies. Most recently, he was in the as a group vice president in the development and strategy at Huhtamäki, and previously he has also led IT organizations in several companies such as ABB and IBM. Tom also has wide experience on continuous improvement in corporations, and especially based on the Lean Six Sigma methodology. And at present, Tom acts as a board professional and serves several companies as a management consultant. And Tom is also one of the members of the board in Quva as well. Now, during this webinar, let me know. You can write something to the chat if you have questions or concerns, and we will tackle those during the webinar. It might be that I will ask them right away from Tom if you have questions to Tom, or then we will go through the questions at the end of the webinar. The whole webinar will take about 40 minutes, give or take. Okay, so let's start. And so first question to Tom is that nowadays quite many mills and factories already have continuous improvement programs, and they utilize Lean, Six Sigma, or some other frameworks. Now, based on your long experience, how has this field of improving processes and quality evolved during the years?
Well, of course, it has evolved quite a lot. Thanks, by the way, Emil, for your introduction. Yes, it has evolved, and I would say that my experience early on in my career was that continuous improvement was very much about tools and methods. It was very much about trying to find ways of optimizing your processes, trying to find ways of finding the optimal solution, and then going down to the shop floor and telling the guys there that this is how you should be working and this is how we should be doing. Of course, in some types of factories and mills that worked, in many it didn't. And I think the continuous improvement people started to realize very soon that in order to really get an impact out of these good methods and good tools, you definitely have to try to find ways of involving people, getting them to understand the needs for improvement, and then kind of managing the change as well. So I think now continuous improvement is a bit of an umbrella expression of any change. But I think the main thing is that it has to be continuous. It's something that is ongoing. It's not a project or an initiative. It's something that needs to happen all the time, and it needs to. You have to have the goal of trying to get that to become one part of your culture. Also, I would say that what has changed is that recently also a lot of digitalization tools has been entering the field and kind of enhancing the way that continuous improvement is done.
Yeah, thanks. You mentioned about the importance of understanding that it's a continuous process. Have you seen in the past events that an organization has started to do continuous improvement, but it has been limited to some 1 or 2 projects, and then the organization, or at least some people, just give up and focus on some other things.
Yeah, many times, and honestly, I think unfortunately that has been, I think, probably the majority of the cases, and the reason is that in order to really do continuous improvement in a way that creates an impact, you have to be patient in the beginning. You have to invest into that. You have to train your people. You have to get your first successes and stuff, and that means that you also have to have the patience of ensuring that you get the first impacts, and you don't scare people by just spending money. So that's, I think, the real clue in getting the change and the improvement to really become continuous.
Right. Yeah. Thanks. Now we will discuss the people side, culture side a bit later. But what of course always is of interest to Quva is data. And speaking of data, do you see that increasing amounts of data actually help to do things better, or just confuse people in the process of trying to improve things?
Well, of course it can confuse, and sometimes as there's I think a proverb about that if you can't convince people, confuse them, and sometimes data is used to confuse people. But I mean, seriously, I think data is key to any change, and the reason is that if you start a change program, the first thing you have to ask yourself is, so what's the problem? And the next thing you have to ask yourself is, what is success? And both of these questions you need to answer with data. So you need data from the very beginning to get your problem statement correct and understand what you are doing. And then along the way in your project, you have to also use data to prove that you're making progress.
Right. Are people are they familiar with data in general? As what I've understood is that the core thing is to get all people involved in continuous improvement, and then some people might be very familiar with utilizing data, doing things based on that, but then some others, the data itself might not be something that they are utilizing every day. So is there differences on that, and what to do about it?
Yes, there are differences, and partly it boils down to the IT systems that you're using. And I mean, what I mean with that is that sometimes your IT systems are very good at providing you with data, but I would say that in most cases the systems are just giving you part of the picture, and that means that people are not familiar with the data from a kind of total perspective over the whole line or the whole process, and what that creates is an opportunity to use the data to prove your point. And just to make a very short story, we once had a plant where we did a waste project, and they had never really broken down the waste kind of enough in granularity so that they could pinpoint where the biggest contributors are. And
Right.
just having the facts on the table and creating awareness among leadership created attention and created priority and gave that plant an opportunity to make the changes. But they would never have been able to do that unless there would have been this new data on the table.
Right. Yeah, that reminds me of one of our customer once said, after seeing the data analysis and visualization product that we showed, that life would have been a lot easier if this software would have been in use already 20 years ago, and I guess that referred to the problem of not having the data in front of you to make decisions, and that often leads into just maybe arguing with some knowledge that one person is of this opinion and the other of that.
Exactly. Yeah, that's what it ends up with. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Now then, people talk a lot about change management, and as far as I understand, continuous improvement is not just about having a framework and data, but also about helping people in the organization to change. So how do you see this?
Well, the real path to understanding the impacts and the change really comes from first of all, of course, the data analysis that you have, and understanding what kind of challenges you have in front of you. But I think as mentioned before, we have to understand also the challenge and the obstacles in getting people to realize what needs to happen. So managing those changes in the actual organization, understanding what it takes.
Yeah. Is that difficult? as people are different, and
Yeah.
different things motivate people as well.
Sure.
What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I honestly, I think we tend to kind of exaggerate the need or the difficulty of getting people involved, and especially I think people on the shop floor. If you talk about middle management, if you talk about top management, that's normally a bit more difficult. People on the shop floor, they normally understand that there are requirements for improvement. They even often are aware of the fact that sometimes the process is working much better than other times. So kind of intuitively they understand that they can reach that better level of performance continuously if they put some structure in place. So I think getting people on the shop floor to realize the need for change is not that difficult if you do it in a way that you involve them, you engage them, you understand, or you explain why we are doing it, what the reasons are, and then they also, or you make them part of the solution.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I guess it's a lot about people skills. As no, I guess no one in the organization really wants to hurt the organization or others as such. Yeah. It's just about kind of getting aligned so that you are all going to the same direction and not in a way that one is going this way and the other a bit this way, and that creates then friction.
Yeah, and by the way, I get also often asked the question that does it differ between cultures? Because when doing these kind of improvement initiatives in different types of geographies, people tend to think that, well, it's of course much more difficult to do in, let's say, China or India or wherever. I would claim that it's exactly as difficult or easy in any culture. The real difference is that if you get the people to understand and also engaged into why they are doing it, and you somehow get, first of all, the first reward to them is that somebody comes there and asks them that what's your opinion, and if you then get some kind of rewards for people and lines who improve, then that normally is something that gets also the whole plant or the whole mill involved. Again, a small example, there was one mill once that had a kind of mill-wide efficiency improvement project. And what happened was that when they reached, or when one of the lines reached a certain level of improvement, they got all the funding and money for painting their machinery and cleaning up and doing some kind of real improvements in the equipment, the tools and stuff that they had.
Right.
And if you think about that, there's one line that gets a new paint on their machines. Everybody knows about it, and everybody can go and say, "Well, I want to do that as well."
That's right.
So you can do small things and get the engagement.
How important are these kind of incentives in the process of forming the right culture for continuous improvement?
Yeah, of course, it's a sign. It's the sign of that. It's not only this guy who comes down there and does the project that thinks that this is important. If you get some kind of incentives, some rewards, the team gets to go out for a night or have a team building off-site event, that gives a signal that also people who are controlling the money thinks this is important. So that top management is also thinking this is important, and that in that way it's a sign.
Right, and I assume that one important thing related to incentives is probably, as you talked about this example, is to make things visual, to make things visual in a way that now we have succeeded somehow, and it is shown. One thing is to get better results from a machine or kind of performance metrics, but completely another thing is, for example, getting the machine painted or something else.
Yeah, and another example is that if you work with a project for improving, for example, your delivery performance, and you get higher remarks and from the customer that now we have improved our delivery accuracy. Taking that message, asking the customer to send an email, and putting that in frames by the machine can really make a big difference in how the people kind of feel about their performance and what they have achieved.
Yeah, that's true. Everybody wants to see the how their work has affected things,
exactly.
or other people.
And very seldom does the operators actually get any visibility about what the customer thinks about the products that they are producing.
Right, and also when talking about analytics and visualization tools, I guess that's one of the key things, to make things visual, and if possible to make it shown what kind of effect you have had directly to some parameter, but also in long term for a customer as well.
Yeah, sure, definitely.
Yeah. So as we talked about people and change management, let's talk about tacit knowledge as well. So knowledge that might not be easily accessible through data, but it is in the collective minds of employees who have worked in the factory or a mill for many years, developing their understanding and collecting experiences. What kind of role does this tacit knowledge have in continuous improvement?
Well, sometimes it actually could be even negative, and then I'm talking about these cases where people have learned bad behaviors. I mean, they have their own settings for the machine or whatever, and in that case, it actually could be a negative effect. But I would say that in most cases, tacit knowledge is something that the operators or the people have during the years kind of through trial and error found that, well, this seems to work. And if you somehow can capture that, compare it with real data, and combine it with real data, and out of that extract the optimal settings or the optimal way of doing things, then normally you you find the best solution. And also, if you but just reminding again that if you do that, you do then engage the people in the solution. So they are not part of the problem as they normally think, they are part of the solution.
That's right. Yeah, that's a very important thing that that people get, that they also get a feeling, which would be true at the same time, that their opinion, their experience is valued. And
Yeah.
and for example, when we are implementing our analytic software to a mill, it is very important to have the discussions with the personnel from the mill who have the domain expertise, as that is very valuable in terms of when we configure the analytics and take that information into account. So it's not only about automated analysis of data, because if you do that only blindly without the domain knowledge, then you might end up into useless information. But if you combine that with the tacit knowledge with that the people in the mill already have, then you really have the winning solution, and which helps you to do things better.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's also important to kind of put yourself in the shoes of the people on the shop floor that needs to then implement those kind of recommendations or stuff that you come up with. I mean, what they also will be very, they will have difficulties to understand is that if you say that, well, artificial intelligence will now replace your intelligence. So you have to be careful in not kind of overemphasizing that when in implementation. Of course, it's so important in the solution itself, but anyway, it's combining data, and one element in that combination could be the tacit knowledge.
Exactly. So going back to continuous improvement as such, what would be your list of do's and don'ts for companies, especially in the process manufacturing?
Well, first of all, I would say that it's important to start small and scale fast. And the reason why I say this is that we actually discussed that a bit earlier. I think the biggest mistake companies often do is that when they come up with a problem that, well, now our cost structure is not any more competitive, we have to do something about it. The first thing they do is that they start printing posters, and they start having town hall meetings, and they explain that now we have this XYZ program, and it has all these great methodologies and stuff. People have seen that so many times that kind of turns down a lot of the people that need to somehow get committed. So I would say that start small, try to find a unit where you know that there are issues and problems, but also a willingness to change. Do your stuff there, get those improvements, implement your tools and methods, and prove in a smaller scale that this works. And then you can start printing your posters, because then you have a case. And then it's important to do this kind of in a structured way, getting people from other units involved, trained in that unit where you have done it the first time, going back to their plants, getting those plants also going. So kind of then spreading out the knowledge. But I think the important thing is that without proof, there's no knowledge. And maybe the second leg I would like to, kind of second thing I would like to point out is that it's so important to measure your effects. So I think it's a bit of a lazy approach if you say that, well, our improvements are such that they can't be measured. Every improvement can be measured somehow. You have to do some assumptions and stuff, but you have to measure them. And then when you can measure that, well, this year we have saved 10 million euros, then you can motivate the investment into scaling it up and doing it in other units and getting more people involved.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, those are very good points. Regarding the first thing you said, that they gain the proof in a fast and lean way, and then start printing the posters and scaling up. That reminds me of what I've heard in some companies, that when talking about lean, for example, some companies have set up teams to do lean and kind of disseminate that information to others. But in some places, the lean term itself has become sort of a curse word for many people working in the organization. As such, if you don't know what lean is, that just sounds like some I don't know, a brand name for something that is not tangible, and therefore, for example, some companies have changed the name of the lean team into, let's say, improvement team or continuous improvement, which is more telling about what it is, instead of having this kind of brand name and promising a lot but not showing much.
Yeah, I think from that perspective, I think what works, that's what you should use. And if there has been a kind of history of trying out different methods that haven't worked, and this project has been then failing, then of course you shouldn't use the same terminology. You should use something else, even though you do exactly the same thing.
Yeah. And regarding the second thing you said about measuring, that's of course something that is easier than with the right tools as well. In a way, getting information in real time and getting easy access on kind of aggregate data from different sources in the mill or a factory. So, like you said, it's not in a way that you cannot measure things. You can, but it also can be that some things are easier to be measured than others, and then it depends also on the tools how easy it is. So that's one thing to keep in mind as well.
Yeah, and that's a good point. This example I mentioned earlier about the waste problem that this mill had, and when the waste volumes were broken down, it actually ended up in a dialogue in the management team about how this project should be set up, and the person leading the unit that had the highest waste numbers, of course, immediately said that, well, I don't trust your numbers.
Right.
And of course, that's the natural reaction to people where they are blamed about being the worst contributor.
That's right.
And that's when you have to have your data in shape. You have to have a measurement system that you have proven to be correct. And then you have to kind of base all your arguments on data. And that's where this really comes to use the fact that as your quality of your project is totally dependent on how well you can measure what you actually get as an impact.
Yeah, that's a good point. So it's not about just getting information, but also you get the means to manage the change inside the organization and get people aboard.
Exactly, correct. Yeah.
Now, as you are quite familiar already with what Quva is doing, what are your thoughts on how our analytics and visualization software could help in taking continuous improvement to the next level in a company?
Well, what I initially found so interesting in the Quva solution was that it actually provided one missing link that a lot of continuous improvement projects have. And that's the fact that when you do continuous improvement in projects, what happens is that you do a lot of analysis. Sometimes you do statistical analysis. You use your Minitabs and your tools, and then you find what kind of changes are necessary to do, and then you implement those changes, and then you check that, well, could this work? Is this giving the effect that you were expecting? What this kind of a tool like Quva is creating on top of that is a possibility to then tap into those data sources that you have initially or found to be the root cause for your problems, and then you can continue measuring kind of online those particular indicators, which means that you get an instant way of correcting when those indicators again start going south.
Right.
And when I think one of the really critical elements on continuous improvement is maintaining the improved performance levels. And with this solution, that's never a problem anymore, because immediately when you go outside of your range of those indicators, you can act, and you don't have to wait for the next project to correct that. You can correct it immediately.
Right. Yeah. So it's about getting more resources or a tool for kind of controlling the system, which is improved, and kind of daily management as well.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the critical thing there is that if you manage to do that, then what you actually get is an indicator early on before things go wrong. And for example, in quality issues, often you find out that that things have gone wrong when you get a web break or similar, and then it's too late already. But I think if you have this kind of tool that is managing your data constantly, combining data with different sources, and then giving indicators online, then you can actually save a lot of money through avoiding crashes.
Yeah. And one thing that what we have also been focusing on lately is the kind of the project phase as well, and the troubleshooting itself. So there's a lot of manual work combining data sources, selecting different variables, trying different things. And what we've tried to do is to automate many of those things so that troubleshooting and root cause analysis could be done like with a fraction of time compared to the traditional tools. So that's definitely one thing, how to kind of complement the daily management with the automation of several tasks during the project phases of continuous improvement.
Yeah, that's true.
So now the last question, always a difficult question to answer, is what do you think the future looks like in terms of continuous improvement?
Well, first of all, I think what has happened is that continuous improvement already has become kind of a mainstream thing. It's not something that is unique or a project on the side or a program that people or companies are starting. It's something that let's say in most cases already is part of the way of operating a business. And I think this comes from the realization that unless you are in conformance with your customer expectations, then you're not playing. You're not in the playground at all. That's kind of the minimum standard that you have to reach up to. After that, every improvement gives you a competitive advantage. Of course, that improvement can be copied. So you have to all the time be ahead of your competition in improving your productivity and your performance. And the only way to do that is to create a culture where the organization is doing that very much independently. So that is, I think, the future, that more and more this becomes part of the whole organization's agenda, not only the management or the process engineers or whoever. It becomes part of the agenda of everybody in the organization. And the other thing is that as this becomes the case, there will be a huge need for kind of democratizing data so that everybody has access to the data so that they can do their analysis on their own and they can then find improvement opportunities. So that will be the next challenge for the systems, the mill systems, to provide people with data to analyze what they are working with.
Yeah, that's a good point. As when if we talk a lot about getting all aboard in continuous improvement, then it cannot be that only a few people in a factory actually have access to data or can do something with the data, as it is such a critical element in doing successful continuous improvement.
Yeah. And I think that also creates this kind of positive spiral of improvement and motivation, because when people see themselves that their indicators are improving, they get more with motivation to do things differently. And I think it's always surprisingly, also you find it very surprising how people get motivated from improving their own work environment. It's, I mean, if people can, I mean, if they are given the tools and the ways of, for example, cleaning up their part of the process, they will spend days off doing that, because they feel that it's so much nicer to come to work if you have a clean environment. And I think these kind of spirals you have to support and strengthen.
Yeah. Hey, thank you very much, Tom. And thank you everybody for joining to the webinar, and stay tuned also for our next webinars on the second half of this year. And if you didn't already know, you can also download a guide with the same theme, data-driven improvement, from our website, www.quva.fi/en. So visit there as well if you want a guide. And if you are interested to hear more about Quva's product and how it helps to decrease variation in production and support continuous improvement, don't hesitate to contact me, and my contact details can also be found from the same website or from LinkedIn, for example. And I don't see any questions from the audience at this time, so you can also send questions to me later if you have any. But once again, thank you very much, Tom, for your insight, and I hope that audience received some useful thoughts of this webinar. Thank you very much.